Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views on Thursday, October 3rd, 2024. Let's take care of the housekeeping and a few contextual remarks before we get into today's story. Don't forget, we do have a vid chat tomorrow at 2 p.m. I was under the weather earlier this week. I still am a little bit, but pretty much the coughing and sniffling and achy joints and all that have disappeared. So I'm going to go ahead with the vid chat. That's tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m. As usual, I'll be in there early to make sure everything is up and running smoothly. Don't forget, get your comments and questions in no later than 10 p.m. U.S. Central Time. That is to say, when I sit down to print out all the scans and stories. Also, please remember, limit yourself to one post. Don't keep posting and drive other people off. Remember, this is a 3-hour time limit, so it's kind of first come, first serve. All right, with that in mind, as everyone knows, we had the hurricane strike the southeastern United States. And I have to tell you, from what I am hearing and seeing on the alternative media, the devastation is biblical in proportions. And my disgust, my utter contempt and disgust for the, quite frankly, lack of response that I'm seeing from this misadministration, and even the callous disregard for the story displayed by the lamestream propaganda media, is utterly off the chart. I have my suspicions as to why this response is the case. I do not want to air them because they are so disgusting, but I'm sure that many of you can imagine what they are. I also have my profound suspicions that this hurricane was to some degree artificially influenced, manipulated, steered. I don't know what words you want to use. We're learning some things about the property and lithium deposits and things of this sort. It's beyond the pale. What's truly disgusting to me is not only the lackluster federal response from this awful, awful administration, but the fact that we have billions of dollars for a war that we should not have provoked and should not be involved in any way whatsoever in the Ukraine, and for that matter for Israel. And don't get me wrong, folks, I am absolutely foursquare behind Israel's right to exist, but we do not need to financially prop up another country at the expense of our own. This whole thing is absolutely disgusting. So that is the context, believe it or not, in which I want to talk about today's story. The story itself, this article that I'm going to be reading almost the entirety of, was shared by Kelly M. at the Common Surface. You're familiar with that broadcast. I've been a guest on occasion on that broadcast. So this story is coming to us from one of our many sharers of articles. I want you, as you listen to this story, to think of the context in which I just spoke. The hurricane, the lackluster response from the government, the utter callous disregard for the story on the part of the lamestream propaganda media, the TASS and Pravda people at certain national newspapers and networks. So here we go. The article is titled Texas Stock Exchange Announces Executive Leadership Team with Governor Abbot. So here's the opening paragraphs. Listen very carefully. Quote, Governor Greg Abbott, a number of global business leaders, and several current and former state elected officials announced the executive leadership team for the newly formed Texas Stock Exchange, which is going to be abbreviated TXSE. The team comprises a bevy of heavy hitters in the capital investor community and former heads of finance. Jeffrey Brown, former acting general counsel for Charles Schwab and former head of its Office of Legislative and Regulative Affairs in Washington, D.C. Jonathan Ross, former chief technology officer at KCG Holdings, Inc., and former Texas Governor and U.S. Energy Secretary Rick Perry are just a few of the names that comprise the leadership team. The Texas Stock Exchange was announced back in June with the stated intention of competing with other exchanges around the world, including the New York Stock Exchange. I'm skipping a couple of short paragraphs here and continuing, quote, in response to a question from the Texan about whether the new exchange has structures in place to push back against the environmental, social, and governance movement that has become popular with many large companies and investors, James Lee, founder and CEO of the Texas Stock Exchange Group, Incorporated, reiterated that, quote, the exchange is apolitical, unquote, unquote. Now remember those words as you ponder this paragraph. Abbot went on to comment that, quote, there is a reason why we are number one for doing business, and that is because we make it easy as possible to do business in the state of Texas. The same goes for the Texas Stock Exchange, unquote. In 2021, Abbot signed Senate Bill SB 13, mandating that Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts to create a list of companies that are divesting from or sanctioning fossil fuels. Pension funds with investments in these companies, whether through direct holdings or exchange-traded funds, must divest from them and reinvest in other assets. Texas also maintains a list of companies deemed to be boycotting the state of Israel and prohibits state entities from doing business with them. State pension dollars are also banned from being invested into or through these corporations as well. Now, again, I don't have any problem with that because I am not one of those that believes that the state of Israel has no right to exist. However, I do think there has to be some latitude in this sanctions business, particularly when some of the behavior of the Israeli military since the October 7th attacks is, at least as far as I'm concerned, highly questionable on moral grounds. So that's it, folks. The Texas Stock Exchange hopes to be up, as they note in the final paragraph, for the first trades and listings in early 2026. So what do I think is going on? Why the context of the hurricane and everything else? As you know, I have suspected for some time that many states in the United States, the so-called state deep states, have taken the measure of the corruption going on in the swamp and the out-of-control nature of that corruption and of this government, that they're taking definite steps to put into place an infrastructure to bypass and allow the states to bypass the federal government and any financial sanctions it may place on states that do not toe the federal narrative. And a stock exchange is one of those things that you want to have around in order to conduct trade and business, as this article points out, with the rest of the world, and please note its words, to compete with other stock exchanges. Now, in the context of the article, they said global stock exchanges. But I suspect that the real target here, as we saw way back when the story broke that I blogged about of the NASDAQ exchange moving its data center to Dallas, that this is a direct swipe and strike against the concentration of those stock exchanges in New York City, and therefore of those stock exchanges being held hostage to policies and out-of-control governments in New York and the Fed. That's what I suspect. Now, The other thing that I have mentioned that we need to look for is a similar move on commodities markets, particularly things like gold and silver, but also ultimately agricultural commodities and so on. The Chicago Mercantile Board of Trade and all of those concentrated commodities markets in Chicago. I suspect you're going to see a similar market bid, not only on the part of Texas, but on the part of other state governments, possibly Florida, maybe Louisiana, so on and so forth. In other words, getting the infrastructure out of that northeastern corridor. That's what I suspect is going on. Time will tell, of course, if I'm correct, but I suspect that this is just a first move. And as things continue to go this crazy, kooky route of maintaining the empire of the city, in this case Swampington, D.C., at the cost of the entire rest of the country and the very people that you're supposed to be governing for, and ignoring their plight, I suspect you're going to see this ratchet up into high gear, particularly if certain outcomes of this election occur, outcomes which it looks to me all too more than coincidental that this hurricane might have been designed to enhance or help or aid, in addition to all the other agendas that have been advanced for rigging the weather. So that's it for today's news and views, folks. I wish it was better news, but it's at least intriguing news to see where all of this is going to go. Don't forget the vid chat tomorrow at 2 p.m. Cross your fingers that this cold and achy sniffles and all that stuff is not going to come back. My voice is already, as you can tell, a little hoarse, but we will tough it through, and I'll see everybody on the flip side. Bye-bye, and God bless.